falling for nobody else.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Cooking with Jean. I'm Jean Lanahan from East Wind Lobster and Grill. Today we're going to be making from scratch stuffed quahogs. They're simple, delicious, fresh, local quahogs. So stay tuned for this delicious show.
I'm flying high, but I've got a feeling I'm falling for nobody else,
For the stuffed quahogs, we start with the main ingredient is quahogs. We start with, these are local quahogs, which we got from Onset. Today we're cooking 10 of these. We're going to steam them up. We're going to chop them up. We're going to add all our delicious spices and onions and celery and all of that good stuff as we go. So what we started first with this is we went over to this pot and we started steaming the quahogs. So there's actually 10 quahogs cooking in the pot, which means we're going to break them in half and we're going to make 20 stuffies. We're going to look at the cost of all of this. You're going to be amazed at how economical this is. It does take a little bit of a time, but we've actually prepped some of the vegetables with the help of my assistant, Kristen, who's here. She'll be helping us, and she's done a wonderful job of getting our pantry in order. So now that the quahogs are beginning to steam, we're going to move over to the saute pan. In the saute pan, I have the recipe over here, which has celery, peppers, 2 peppers. We used both red pepper and green pepper because we love peppers. Onions, these are minced. This is a ½ pound of chorizo. You could use linguiça, and actually on the recipe I sometimes put in a pound, but today we're going to do something different. We're going to add a little bit extra of clams. Once we steam and open the quahogs themselves, you'll see there's not a ton of meat and not enough to go as far as we like it. So we're cheating and adding, these are just sea clams that are minced, and they add a great consistency and taste and all of that to the quahog. So let's get started with the saute pan. We're going to start with a stick of butter. So we're going to add the stick of butter. This is what takes the most time, is getting your vegetables where you want them to be. And like I said, we've already cheated. We have our celery diced, our onions, this is about a ½ pound of linguiça, and 2 bell peppers. So let's just keep adding as we go. In goes the celery, peppers, white onion. It's funny when we tell people, or when people ask, you make your stuffed quahogs from scratch? Of course we do. Everybody has their own little spin on it, but we stick to this recipe, and to me it's a pretty foolproof recipe. It includes not just bread, but we also add some cracker flakes, like a Ritz cracker, crushed Ritz cracker. And one of our really key ingredients, or a secret ingredient in here, is we add some cornbread. We cook cornbread here with our dinners every day, so there's always a little bit of scrap, you know, a little bit of stale bread or whatever. We crush that up, and it not only adds a little bit more to the consistency, it makes it nice and grainy, but it also adds a sweetness too. So to offset that sweetness, we add a lot more peppers and some crushed red pepper, some wine, and some really good spices. So Kristen over here we're going to start sauteing. So the first things that we're going to add here is linguiça. We add the linguiça now because we like it to caramelize a little bit, but also this was when all the nice oils extracted right into the peppers and onions. So this is what takes a little bit of time. We've got it on high heat. There's a stick of butter in there, so we don't want these vegetables to brown, but we definitely want them to get nice and soft. Nothing worse than biting into a stuffy with a crispy onion in there, in my opinion anyway. So what we do next is, while this is simmering, we're going to add our dry spices. Again, we add the dry spices now because we want everything to melt together and do its magic as it's cooking. We're also going to add the crushed red pepper. So again, this is what takes the longest time. How are the quahogs doing over there? Quahogs are coming to a steam. In total, they're only going to take about 10-15 minutes, if that. They're going to pop open. When they're open, we're going to remove them. We're going to reserve some of the broth. We're going to take out the quahog. We're going to mince it up. So we're doing 2 or 3 things at a time here to save time. So we're going to let this continue to do its thing. I'm going to now add some liquid. The liquid that we're adding is white wine, of course. This is a Pinot Grigio. This is a quart. We're not adding a quart. We're going to add about a cup, heavy cup. And I'm also going to add, this is one of our key ingredients in the house. It's this is a clam base, which is a very concentrated, it's not a bouillon, it's a base. So we use clam base and chicken base around here. So as you see, we did not add a lot of salt, hardly at all. But this would be our sodium that's going to go in there. In addition to the broth on the Quahogs has some salt in it as well.
Show me the ring and I'll jump right through. I used to.
Again, we did not want to caramelize anything, so we kept a lot of liquid in here. We are now going to add a little bit more clam broth. We reserved some clam broth from what was cooking. So we're going to add a little clam broth, make it come to a nice boil. This is about 3 quarts in total. Like I said, we're adding more clams than the meat, than the linguiça. So once we take apart the clams that we just cooked, we're going to weigh out how much meat we get, because this is about a pint of chopped clams. And again, this is a sea clam. And they work wonderfully in a stuffed quahog. I'm going to add this. We just want them to cook a little bit. Well, Chris is mincing the quahogs that we took out of the shell. It was only about a half a pound of meat. She's mincing that up. We're going to add that to the bread. And we're going to add all of our liquids. Plop that right in there. It smells delicious. Celery, onion, red pepper, green pepper, charisse, butter, wine, clam broth, and some whole clams, some chopped clams. And if you're making these at home and you have to go out and buy the ingredients, they cost about $1 each to make. Here's all the quahog, the real quahog meat. Again, if I was making this amount of quahogs, 10, this is 10, I don't think this is enough meat. That's why I added some chopped clams. But it's totally your choice. Just going to fold that in. What we want this to feel like is like a meatball texture. You don't want it to be too wet, you don't want it to be too dry. Sometimes we even let this sit for a few hours, come back to it, and that's when we would add more liquid if we needed to. But it feels pretty good. Don't want to overwork it. Just like your meatballs, you don't want to overwork meatballs. They get too tight and dense. The last thing that we're going to add to this is hot sauce, and we add a good amount of hot sauce. We don't want to make them any bigger than this because they pop out of the shell, and 4 ounces is perfect for a stuffed quahog. I'm going to brush them with a little butter. They look beautiful. They're ready to go into the oven. Our oven is set on 375. When you put this many in, it takes a little bit longer, so we'll just check them in a half an hour, see where we're at. We want them to have a little bit of a crust on them, and you'll see them bubbling with the butter and the liquids inside there because they're nice and moist. So we'll check them in about a half an hour. Thank you for joining us at this episode of Cooking with Jean and Kristen, my assistant, where we made fresh stuffed quahogs from scratch. These quahogs are from onset, so they don't get much more local. And I hope we showed you some simplified way to make these with some really delicious fresh ingredients. So, bon appetit. It's not too hot to bite, right? 'Cause I did that once. Speechless. Delicious.
I used to.